The August sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty trail leading into Kennewick, Washington Territory. And Yates Whitmore had been riding for 3 days straight when he heard the sound that made him rein in his horse so hard the animal whinnied in protest. It was a woman crying, her sobs carrying across the dry landscape like a mournful song that pierced straight through his weathered heart. He dismounted quickly, his boots hitting the hard, packed earth with a soft thud, and followed the sound around a rocky outcropping where an old stone well stood beside what looked like the remains of a homestead that had seen better days. There she was, collapsed against the well's edge, her shoulders shaking with the force of her grief, her dark hair falling loose from its pins and cascading down her back in waves that caught the afternoon light. Yates approached slowly, not wanting to startle her, his spurs jingling softly with each step. When he was close enough to see the tear tracks staining her dust-covered cheeks, he cleared his throat gently. She looked up with a gasp, her eyes red and swollen, the most striking green he had ever seen despite the sadness pooling in them. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Yates removed his hat, holding it against his chest in a gesture of respect his mother had taught him decades ago. "Madam," he said, his voice rough from days without much use, "I don't mean to intrude on your sorrow, but I cannot ride past a lady in distress without offering assistance." He studied her face, noting the bruise forming along her jaw, the way her dress was torn at the shoulder, the defeated slump of her posture. "Whatever has happened here, whatever has brought you to this point, I am making you a promise right now. Your tears end today, I promise you that." She stared at him as if he had spoken in a foreign tongue, her lips parting in surprise. Then fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, but these seemed different somehow, less hopeless. "You cannot promise such a thing," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "You do not know what I have endured, what I have lost, what terrible fate awaits me." Yates crouched down beside her, close enough that he could see the fine lines of exhaustion around her eyes, the tremble in her hands as she gripped the fabric of her skirt. "Then tell me," he said simply. "My name is Yates Whitmore. I am a cattle driver by trade, though I have done just about every job a man can do in this territory over the past 30 years. I have nowhere pressing to be, and I have always been a good listener." She looked at him searchingly, as if trying to determine whether he was real or some mirage conjured by her desperate mind. Finally, she drew in a shaky breath. "I am Thea Vaughn," she said. "I came to Washington Territory 6 months ago with my husband, Samuel. We had a claim, a small piece of land just beyond this rise. We were going to build a life here, grow wheat, maybe raise some cattle. It was all we talked about during the journey west." Yates noticed she spoke of her husband in the past tense and felt his jaw tighten. "What happened to Samuel?" "Dead," she said flatly, though her voice cracked on the word. "Thrown from his horse 3 weeks ago. Broke his neck. I buried him myself under the cottonwood tree beyond the barn. I have been alone ever since, trying to maintain the homestead, but the well has run nearly dry, the crops are dying, and this morning—" She stopped, pressing a hand to her mouth as if to hold back a sob. "This morning," Yates prompted gently, "this morning Douglas Mercer came to my door. He owns most of the land around here, fancies himself some kind of frontier lord. He said that since Samuel is gone and I am just a woman alone, I should accept his generous offer to buy the land for a fraction of what we paid for it. When I refused, he said I had 1 week to reconsider before he would take more forceful measures to persuade me." She touched her bruised jaw gingerly. "He gave me this as a reminder of how persuasive he can be." Rage burned hot and immediate in Yates's chest, the kind of righteous anger that had gotten him into trouble more than once in his younger years. He had seen men like this Mercer before, men who thought power and money gave them the right to trample over anyone weaker. "Did he hurt you in any other way?" he asked carefully. Thea shook her head quickly. "No. His men pulled him back when he raised his hand to strike me again. I think even they found it distasteful to watch their boss beat a widow. But he will be back, I know it. And next time I will not be so fortunate. I have no one to help me, nowhere to go. I spent what little money we had left on supplies last week. I am trapped here, waiting for inevitable disaster." Yates stood, extending his hand to her. "Not anymore, you are not. Come on, let us get you on your feet and into some shade. Then we are going to figure out how to solve this problem." She took his hand hesitantly, her palm small and calloused against his. When she stood, he could see she was of average height, though the way she had been hunched made her seem smaller. She wore a simple calico dress that had once been blue but was now faded to an indeterminate gray, and her boots were worn through at the toes. Despite her disheveled appearance, there was something undeniably striking about her, a strength in the set of her jaw that belied the tears. "You do not understand," she said as he led her toward the shade of the well's small roof. "Douglas Mercer is not the kind of man who backs down when challenged. He has a dozen men working for him, and everyone in Kennewick is either on his payroll or too frightened to cross him. What can one cowboy possibly do against that?" Yates smiled, though there was no humor in it. "This one cowboy has lived through range wars, Indian conflicts, mining disputes, and more saloon brawls than I care to count. I am still here, which means I am either very lucky or very good at surviving. Besides, I gave you my word. Your tears end today." They reached the shade, and Yates retrieved his canteen from where it hung on his saddle. He handed it to Thea, who drank deeply, water running down her chin in her eagerness. When she finished, she wiped her mouth with the back of her hand and looked at him with something that might have been the beginning of hope. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "You do not know me. You have no obligation to help." "My mother raised me to believe that when you see someone in need and you have the means to help, you help," Yates said, settling down on a large rock and gesturing for her to sit on another nearby. "Besides, I have never been fond of bullies. This Mercer sounds like the worst kind, the kind who uses fear to control people. Someone needs to stand up to him, and it looks like today that someone is me." Thea sat slowly, studying him with those remarkable green eyes. "You could get hurt. You could get killed." "I could," he agreed. "But I could also get trampled by a stampede, shot by a drunk in a saloon, or struck by lightning. Life is full of risks. At least this one is for a good cause." For the first time since he had found her, a ghost of a smile touched Thea's lips. "You are either very brave or very foolish." "Most likely a bit of both," Yates admitted. "Now tell me more about your homestead. How much land do you have? What kind of shape is it in? What resources do you have to work with?" Over the next hour, Thea explained the details of her situation. She and Samuel had claimed 160 acres under the Homestead Act, but only about 20 acres were suitable for farming. They had built a small cabin, a barn, and started a well, but the water table had dropped significantly over the summer, making irrigation nearly impossible. They had planted wheat, but without adequate water, the crop was failing. They had bought 2 milk cows and some chickens, but one of the cows had died last week, probably from drinking bad water. "The claim is worth fighting for," Thea said passionately, "not because of what it is now, but because of what it could be. There is a creek that runs through the northern section during the spring, and if I could build a proper irrigation system, the land would be fertile." Samuel had plans drawn up, ideas for how to make it work. "But that takes money and time and people to help, none of which I have." Yates listened carefully, his mind already working through possibilities. "This Mercer, What does he want with your land specifically? Does it have something he needs? Thea nodded slowly. That creek I mentioned. It is part of a larger water system that feeds into the Columbia River. Samuel said that Mercer has been buying up all the land along that creek because whoever controls the water controls the valley. If he gets our section, he will have complete control. He could charge whatever he wants for water rights, essentially forcing out any smaller ranchers or farmers. So it is about power, Yates said. Figures, men like that are always about power. He stood, pacing a few steps as he thought. All right, here is what we are going to do. First, I am going to ride into town and take a measure of this Douglas Mercer. I want to see what kind of man we are dealing with, get a sense of his operation. While I am gone, I want you to gather up any important papers, anything related to your claim, your deed, anything Samuel might have left behind. We need to make sure everything is legal and documented. If Mercer tries to take your land, he will have to do it through proper channels, and we need to be ready. He will not bother with proper channels, Thea said quietly. He will just take it. Maybe, Yates acknowledged, but maybe not if he knows people are watching. Sometimes bullies back down when they realize they have an audience. At the very least, it will buy us time to come up with a better plan. Thea stood as well, wrapping her arms around herself despite the heat. I do not know how to thank you. I do not know why you are doing this, but thank you. Yates picked up his hat from where he had set it down and placed it back on his head, tugging the brim low against the sun. Thank me when it is over and you still have your land. For now, stay here, stay safe, and wait for me to come back. I should return before nightfall. He mounted his horse, a sturdy roan mare named Bella who had carried him faithfully for 5 years. As he turned to ride away, Thea called out to him. Yates, he looked back at her, silhouetted against the well, the afternoon light turning her hair to burnished copper. Yes, be careful. Douglas Mercer is a dangerous man. So am I when I need to be, Yates replied. Then he urged Bella into a trot, heading toward the town of Kennewick. The ride took about 40 minutes, following a well-worn trail that wound through sagebrush and rocky outcroppings. Kennewick, in August of 1885, was a growing town, benefiting from its position along the Columbia River and the recent arrival of the Northern Pacific Railroad. The main street was wide and dusty, lined with false-fronted buildings that housed everything from a general store to a saloon, a hotel, a bank, and a land office. Yates tied Bella to a hitching post outside the saloon and pushed through the swinging doors. Inside, the air was cooler and thick with the smell of tobacco, whiskey, and unwashed bodies. A dozen men occupied the space, some playing cards, others standing at the bar nursing drinks. The bartender, a portly man with an impressive mustache, looked up as Yates approached. What can I get you? The bartender asked. Whiskey, Yates said, placing a coin on the bar, and some information if you are willing to share it. The bartender poured a generous measure and slid the glass across the polished wood. Information depends on what you are asking about. Douglas Mercer, Yates said, watching the bartender's reaction carefully. The man's expression closed off immediately, his jaw tightening. Mister, if you are smart, you will drink that whiskey, get back on your horse, and ride out of here. Questions about Douglas Mercer tend to lead to trouble. I have already found the trouble, Yates said evenly. I am just trying to figure out the best way to deal with it. A voice spoke from behind him, cultured and smooth. Perhaps I can help with that. Yates turned to find a man standing there, tall and well-dressed in a dark suit that looked out of place in the frontier town. He was probably in his early 40s, with graying hair at his temples and cold blue eyes that assessed Yates with the calculation of a man used to being in control. 3 other men flanked him, all wearing similar expressions of barely concealed menace. "You must be Douglas Mercer," Yates said. "I must be," Mercer agreed with a thin smile. "And you are," Yates Whitmore, "just passing through." "Passing through," Mercer repeated as if tasting the words. "And yet here you are, asking questions about me. That suggests more than passing interest. Tell me, Mr. Whitmore, what brings you to Kennewick?" Yates met his gaze steadily. "I met a woman today, a widow named Thea Vaughn. She tells me you have been pressuring her to sell her land." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. The other patrons suddenly found their drinks very interesting, and even the bartender busied himself wiping down an already clean section of the bar. Mercer's smile widened, but it did not reach his eyes. "Mrs. Vaughn is a tragic case," Mercer said with false sympathy. "Losing her husband so soon after arriving in the territory, I simply offered to help her by purchasing her claim for a fair price. She is in over her head, trying to maintain that land on her own. It is only a matter of time before she fails, and I was attempting to save her from that inevitable outcome." "By hitting her?" Yates asked quietly. Mercer's expression did not change, but something flickered in his eyes. "I have no idea what you are talking about. If Mrs. Vaughn has sustained an injury, perhaps she fell while attempting to work beyond her capabilities. She should accept help when it is offered." "The help of a man who wants to steal her land, you mean?" "Careful, Mr. Whitmore," Mercer said, his voice hardening. "You are making accusations you cannot prove against a respected businessman. That could be considered slander, and I have lawyers who would be happy to pursue such a case. Furthermore, I wonder what business this is of yours. You say you are just passing through, yet here you are, appointing yourself as Mrs. Vaughn's champion. One might think you have ulterior motives." Yates drained his whiskey and set the glass down with a soft clink. "My motives are simple. I do not like bullies, and I especially do not like bullies who target women. Mrs. Vaughn's land is legally hers, and she has made it clear she does not want to sell. That should be the end of the discussion." "Should be," Mercer agreed, "but sometimes circumstances change. Sometimes people realize that accepting a generous offer is better than losing everything. I suspect Mrs. Vaughn will come to that realization very soon." "Is that a threat?" "That is reality," Mercer said. He gestured to his men, and they moved toward the door. Before following them, Mercer turned back to Yates. "A piece of advice, Mr. Whitmore. Kennewick is my town. I control the land office, the bank, and most of the businesses on this street. I employ half the men in this county. If you choose to interfere in my business dealings, you will find yourself very alone and very unwelcome. The smart thing would be to continue passing through, preferably before morning. Think about it." With that, Mercer swept out of the saloon, his men following like trained dogs. The moment they were gone, the tension in the room eased slightly, though everyone still avoided looking directly at Yates. The bartender leaned across the bar, his voice barely above a whisper. "You should listen to him. Mercer does not make empty threats. 3 months ago, a farmer tried to stand up to him over water rights. His barn burned down that same night. 2 weeks later, his cattle were poisoned. He sold out and left the territory with his family. That is what happens to people who cross Douglas Mercer." Yates tapped his empty glass, and the bartender refilled it without being asked. "What about the law? Does this town have a sheriff?" "Sheriff Turner," the bartender said with a derisive snort. "He is on Mercer's payroll. He will not help you. No one will. I am sorry about Mrs. Vaughn, truly I am. She seems like a decent woman, but she is fighting a losing battle, and if you are smart, you will not go down with her." Yates finished his second whiskey and paid for both drinks. "I appreciate the warning, but I am not known for being smart." He walked out of the saloon into the late afternoon sun, his mind racing. The situation was worse than he had anticipated. Mercer had not just local power, he had total control. Fighting him through legal channels would be pointless if he controlled the law. Fighting him physically would likely result in an ambush or worse. But walking away was not an option, not after the promise he had made to Thea. He needed allies, and he needed a plan. Yates walked down the main street, observing the town more carefully now. He passed the land office, where a bored clerk sat behind a desk. He passed the bank, an impressive stone building that seemed far too grand for a town this size. He passed several stores, a doctor's office, and a small church. At the end of the street, he found what he was looking for, a newspaper office. The Kennewick Chronicle was a modest operation, just a single room with a printing press taking up most of the space. A young man with ink-stained fingers and wire-rimmed glasses looked up from his work as Yates entered. "Can I help you?" the young man asked. "Maybe," Yates said. "I am looking for information about land sales in the area. Would your newspaper have records of recent transactions?" The young man's eyes narrowed with interest. "We publish land transfers every week." "What specifically are you looking for, Douglas Mercer?" Yates said. "I want to know how many properties he has acquired in the past year and under what circumstances." The young man stood, wiping his hands on his apron. "That is a very interesting question. May I ask why you want to know?" "Because I think he is forcing people off their land illegally, and I want to prove it." A slow smile spread across the young man's face. "Then you and I have something in common. My name is Peter Jenkins. I have been trying to write a story about Mercer's land grabbing for months, but no one will talk to me on the record. They are too afraid." "Can you blame them?" Yates asked. "From what I hear, crossing Mercer is bad for your health." "True enough," Peter admitted. "But that does not make it right. I became a journalist because I believe the press should hold powerful people accountable. Mercer thinks he is above scrutiny, but he is not. If we can prove he is breaking the law, we can stop him." "That is a big if," Yates pointed out, "but I am willing to try." "What can you tell me?" Peter led him to a large filing cabinet and began pulling out back issues of the newspaper. As they spread them across a table, a pattern emerged. Over the past 18 months, Mercer had acquired 23 properties, all of them along the creek system that fed into the Columbia River. Some had been legitimate purchases, but others had suspicious circumstances. One family sold their land for a pittance after their well was contaminated. Another left after their son was badly beaten in an alley, supposedly by drifters who were never caught. A widow sold out after her husband died in a mysterious riding accident. "That last one," Yates said, pointing to the article. "That sounds similar to what happened to Thea Vaughn's husband." "Thea Vaughn," Peter repeated, writing the name down. "Is she the one Mercer is targeting now?" "Yes. He gave her a week to sell or else, but I am not going to let that happen." Peter looked at him with a mixture of admiration and concern. "You do realize you are essentially declaring war on the most powerful man in the county, right? How exactly do you plan to win?" "I am still working on that part," Yates admitted. "But I think we start by making sure everyone knows what he is doing. If we can get the story out, maybe public pressure will force him to back down. Or it will just make him more determined," Peter said. "But it is worth a try. I will start writing the article tonight. If you can get me more evidence, maybe a statement from Mrs. Vaughn, I can have it published in this week's edition." Yates shook Peter's hand. "I will see what I can do. In the meantime, watch your back. If Mercer finds out you are investigating him, you will be in danger too." "I have been in danger since I started asking questions," Peter said with a shrug. "But thank you for the warning. and thank you for giving me a reason to finally write this story." Yates left the newspaper office feeling slightly more hopeful. It was not much, but it was a start. He retrieved Bella and began the ride back to Thea's homestead, arriving just as the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Thea was waiting for him at the cabin, a small structure made of rough-hewn logs with a single window and a door that hung slightly crooked on its hinges. She had lit a lamp inside, and the warm glow spilled out into the gathering darkness. When she saw him, relief washed over her face. "You came back," she said. "I told you I would," Yates replied, dismounting. "Did you find your papers?" She held up a leather satchel. "Everything is here. The deed, the claim documents, receipts for everything we purchased. Samuel was meticulous about record keeping." "Good. We are going to need all of that." He quickly explained his meeting with Mercer and his conversation with Peter Jenkins. As he talked, Thea's expression shifted from hope to fear to determination. "If we make this public, Mercer will retaliate," she said. "Probably," Yates agreed. "Which is why I am going to stay here and make sure he does not have the opportunity. I will sleep in the barn tonight and keep watch. If anyone comes, I will be ready." Thea bit her lip, clearly torn. "I cannot ask you to do that. This is not your fight." "You are not asking. I am offering." He met her eyes in the fading light. "I made you a promise, Thea. Your tears end today. I meant that." Something passed between them in that moment, a connection that went beyond words. Thea nodded slowly. "Then at least let me feed you dinner." "It is not much, but I have beans and cornbread, and I can make coffee." They ate together at the small table in her cabin, talking by lamplight. Thea told him more about her life before coming west, about growing up in Ohio, about meeting Samuel at a church social, about their dreams of starting fresh in a new land. Yates shared stories from his years of wandering, the places he had seen, the people he had met, the lessons he had learned. "You have lived an interesting life," Thea said as she poured him more coffee. "Why have you never settled down, never married?" Yates was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "I suppose I never found the right reason to stop moving. I lost my parents young, had no siblings, no ties to any particular place. It was easier to keep drifting than to put down roots. But lately, I have been thinking maybe I was just waiting for something or someone to give me a reason to stay somewhere." Thea looked down at her hands, her cheeks coloring slightly. "And now I am here," he said simply. "And I am not leaving until we fix this situation." That night, Yates made a bed in the barn, using hay and his bedroll to create a reasonably comfortable sleeping spot. But he did not sleep much. He kept his rifle close and listened to every sound, every cricket chirp and coyote howl, ready for any sign of trouble. The night passed quietly, and when dawn broke, he found Thea already awake, bringing him a plate of eggs and biscuits. "The chickens are still laying," she said with a small smile. "That is something." They spent the morning working on the homestead. Yates repaired the cabin door, fixed a broken section of fence, and examined the well. The water level was indeed dangerously low, but he thought he saw a possible solution. "If we dig deeper and reinforce the sides, we might be able to reach a lower water table," he said. "It will be hard work, but it is doable." "We?" Thea asked. "We," he confirmed. "You are not alone anymore, Thea." Over the next 3 days, they fell into a routine. Yates worked on the well during the cooler morning hours, digging deeper while Thea hauled up buckets of dirt and rock. In the afternoons, they tended to the animals and did other necessary chores. In the evenings, they ate together and talked, sharing more of their lives, their hopes, their fears. With each passing day, the connection between them grew stronger. On the 4th day, Peter Jenkins arrived at the homestead with a stack of newspapers. "It is published," he said. spreading a copy across Thea's table. The headline read, "Pattern of suspicious land acquisitions raises questions about local business practices." The article was carefully worded to avoid direct accusations, but the implications were clear. It detailed the 23 properties Mercer had acquired, the suspicious circumstances surrounding many of the sales, and the fact that he now controlled virtually all water rights in the valley. It quoted unnamed sources who spoke of intimidation and threats. And it prominently featured Thea's case, including the fact that she had been pressured to sell after her husband's death. "This is going to cause trouble," Thea said, reading through the article. "Good," Peter replied. "Mercer has had his way for too long. It is time someone stood up to him." That night, the trouble arrived. Yates was on watch in the barn when he heard the sound of multiple horses approaching. He grabbed his rifle and slipped outside, moving quietly through the darkness. In the moonlight, he could see 6 riders gathered near the cabin, and one of them was holding a torch. "Mrs. Vaughn," a voice called out. Yates recognized it as Mercer's. "I know you are in there. I want to talk to you about that newspaper article. Come out now and we can discuss this civilly." Yates moved quickly, positioning himself behind a water trough where he had a clear view of the riders. He levered around into his rifle's chamber, the metallic click loud in the night air. "She is not coming out, Mercer, and you and your men are going to leave. Now." Mercer turned in his saddle, trying to locate Yates in the darkness. "Mr. Whitmore, I should have known you would still be here. You are making a very serious mistake." "The only mistake here is yours," Yates called back. "Thinking you can intimidate a widow into selling her land. Thinking you can control everything and everyone in this valley. Those days are over. One man with a rifle against 6 of us," Mercer said with cold amusement. "The mathematics do not favor you, Mr. Whitmore." "Maybe not," Yates admitted. "But I guarantee you will be the first one to fall if any of your men make a move. Are you willing to die for this land, Mercer? Because I am willing to kill for it." The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Then Mercer laughed, though it sounded forced. "This is not over, Whitmore. Not by a long shot. You have just made yourself an enemy you cannot afford to have. I will take my chances. Now get off this property before I decide to shoot you for trespassing." Mercer hesitated for a long moment, then jerked his horse's reins. "Let us go, but we will be back." "You can count on that." The riders wheeled their horses and galloped away, leaving only dust and the smell of the torch's smoke. Yates waited until he was sure they were gone, then approached the cabin. Thea opened the door, her face pale in the lamplight. "I heard everything," she said. "Yates, you could have been killed." "But I was not," he said gently. "And neither were you. We are all right." She stepped forward suddenly and wrapped her arms around him, burying her face against his chest. Yates stood frozen for a moment, surprised by the gesture, then slowly brought his arms around her, holding her close. She smelled of soap and wood smoke and something indefinably her, and he realized with sudden clarity that he had not been just protecting her land. He had been protecting her because somewhere in the past few days, she had become important to him in a way he had not anticipated. "Thank you," she whispered against his shirt. "Thank you for staying. Thank you for fighting for me." "Thea," he said softly, "there is nowhere else I would rather be." She pulled back slightly to look up at him, her green eyes searching his face. In the lamplight, with her hair loose around her shoulders and her expression so open and vulnerable, she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Without thinking, he reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering on her cheek. "I think I am falling in love with you," she said, the words tumbling out as if she had been holding them back and could not anymore. "I know it is too soon. I know it is crazy, but I cannot help how I feel." "It is not crazy," Yates said, his voice rough with emotion. because I am falling in love with you too. I think I started falling the moment I heard you crying at that well. I knew then that I would do anything to make you smile, to take away your pain, to give you a reason to be happy again. You have, she said. You have given me hope when I had none. You have given me strength when I felt weak. You have given me a reason to fight. He kissed her then, a gentle press of lips that spoke of promise and possibility. She sighed against him, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, and for a moment the world narrowed to just the two of them, connected in the soft darkness. When they finally pulled apart, Yates rested his forehead against hers. We are going to win this, Thea. I promise you that. Mercer is not going to take your land, and he is not going to hurt you again. We are going to build the life here that you and Samuel dreamed of. Together. Together, she repeated, the word filled with wonder. The next morning, Yates rode back into Kennewick with a specific purpose. He went directly to the land office and requested copies of all documentation related to Thea's claim. The clerk, a nervous man who kept glancing at the door as if expecting Mercer to burst in, reluctantly complied. Yates then visited the sheriff's office, where he formally reported Mercer's visit and his threats, knowing full well that Sheriff Turner would do nothing but wanting to create an official record nonetheless. His final stop was the newspaper office, where he found Peter working on his next article. How has the reaction been to your story? Yates asked. Mixed, Peter admitted. Some people are angry that I dared to criticize Mercer. Others are quietly supportive but too afraid to say anything publicly. But I have received 2 letters from people who claim they were also forced off their land by Mercer. They are willing to tell their stories if I promise not to use their names. That is progress, Yates said. Keep pushing. The more we expose what he has been doing, the harder it will be for him to continue. What about you? What is your plan? I am going to stay at Thea's homestead and help her prove it can be successful. We are going to dig that well deeper, get water flowing again, and show everyone that she has every right to keep her land. And if Mercer tries anything else, I will be there to stop him. Peter studied him for a moment. This is not just about the land anymore, is it? No, Yates admitted. It is not. She is a lucky woman, Peter said. Most people would have just ridden on by. I am the lucky one, Yates replied. I just did not realize it until a few days ago. When Yates returned to the homestead, he found Thea working in what remained of the garden, trying to salvage vegetables from the drought-stricken plants. She looked up as he approached, shading her eyes against the sun, and the smile that spread across her face made his heart skip a beat. I was hoping you would get back soon, she said. I have been thinking about the well. I think I know where we might find a stronger water source. Together, they spent the afternoon examining the land, looking for signs of underground water. Thea showed him an area where the grass was slightly greener, even in the drought, and Yates agreed it was worth investigating. They began digging a new well there, working side by side in the hot sun, their hands blistering but their spirits high. Over the following weeks, they worked harder than Yates had ever worked in his life, but it was different from any other job he had taken. This was not just labor for pay. This was building something, creating a future with a woman he loved more with each passing day. They dug the new well until they hit a strong aquifer, and water rushed up cool and clear. They repaired the irrigation channels Samuel had started. They planted a late crop of vegetables and reinforced the barn. But they also stole moments together, sitting on the porch in the evenings watching the sunset, talking and laughing and learning everything about each other. They shared their first kiss by the new well, and then many more after that, each one deepening the connection between them. Yates moved his things from the barn to the cabin, and though they maintained propriety for appearance's sake, There was no question that they were building a life together. Peter published 2 more articles about Mercer's land dealings, each one containing more damning details. The pressure was building. Some of Mercer's business associates began to distance themselves from him. People in town started whispering. Even Sheriff Turner could not completely ignore the mounting evidence of wrongdoing. Then, 6 weeks after Yates had first found Thea crying at the well, everything came to a head. It was a Saturday morning, and Yates was in the barn when he heard horses approaching. He grabbed his rifle and ran outside, expecting another confrontation with Mercer. Instead, he found a very different group. There were about 15 riders, all of them men Yates recognized from town. They were farmers and small ranchers, working men with weathered faces and determined expressions. At the front of the group was a man Yates had never seen before, tall and broad-shouldered with a sheriff's badge pinned to his chest, but it was not Turner. "You must be Yates Whitmore," the man said, dismounting. "I am Sheriff Edward Morrison from Walla Walla. I have been conducting an investigation into Douglas Mercer's business practices, and I understand you and Mrs. Vaughn have been at the center of his most recent intimidation campaign." Thea emerged from the cabin, wiping her hands on her apron. "Sheriff, what is happening?" "Justice, madam," Morrison said with a slight smile. "Thanks to the articles published by Mr. Jenkins and statements from several witnesses, including yourselves, we have gathered enough evidence to charge Douglas Mercer with fraud, extortion, assault, and several other crimes. He was arrested this morning and is currently sitting in a jail cell awaiting trial." Thea gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "He is arrested, truly, Morrison confirmed. "And Sheriff Turner has been relieved of his duties pending an investigation into his complicity in Mercer's schemes. I have been temporarily appointed to restore order to this county." One of the other riders, a grizzled farmer with kind eyes, spoke up. "Mrs. Vaughn, we owe you and Mr. Whitmore an apology. We should have stood up to Mercer long ago, but we were afraid. When we read those newspaper articles and heard how you were fighting back, it gave us courage. We started talking to each other, sharing our stories, realizing we were not alone. That is when we contacted the territorial authorities." "You do not owe us an apology," Yates said. "You are here now. That is what matters." Another man chimed in. "We have been talking amongst ourselves, and we want to help you get your homestead back on its feet, Mrs. Vaughn. It is the least we can do. We can help you finish those irrigation channels, get your crops planted, whatever you need." Thea's eyes filled with tears, but these were very different from the tears Yates had found her crying weeks ago. These were tears of gratitude and relief. "I do not know what to say. Thank you all so much." Sheriff Morrison tipped his hat. "I will need statements from both of you for the trial, but that can wait a few days. For now, you should know that your land is secure. The territorial government is reviewing all of Mercer's land acquisitions, and any that were obtained through illegal means will be returned to their original owners or their families." After the group left, Yates and Thea stood together on their land, looking out over the fields that were finally beginning to show signs of life thanks to the new water source. The sun was high and bright, and a light breeze carried the scent of sagebrush and possibility. "He really is gone," Thea said, as if she could not quite believe it. "After all this time, after all the fear, he is finally gone." "He is gone," Yates confirmed, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "And you are free. Your land is yours, your future is yours, and no one can take that away." She turned to face him, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. "Our land," she corrected gently. "Our future, if you want it to be." Yates cupped her face in his hands, looking into those beautiful green eyes that had haunted his dreams since the day he met her. "There is nothing I want more. I love you, Thea Vaughn. I want to build a life with you here on this land for as long as you will have me. Forever, she whispered. I want you forever. He kissed her then, long and deep, pouring all his love and promise into the gesture. When they finally parted, both were breathless and smiling. We should get married, Yates said suddenly. Soon, I do not want to wait. Neither do I, Thea agreed. But we should do it properly. I want everyone to see. I want to stand in that church in town and make vows before God and the whole community. I want them to know that we are together, that we have built something good from all this hardship. Then that is what we will do, Yates said. Though I should warn you, I do not have much to my name. Just my horse, my saddle, and what little money I have saved over the years. You will not be marrying a wealthy man. I do not care about wealth, Thea said firmly. You gave me something worth far more than money. You gave me back my life. You gave me hope. You gave me love. That is all I need. 3 weeks later, on a beautiful September day when the heat had finally broken and the air was crisp with the promise of autumn, Thea and Yates were married in the small church in Kennewick. The building was packed with people, far more than Yates had expected. Peter Jenkins was there, beaming with pride at the role his journalism had played in bringing justice to the valley. Sheriff Morrison attended, along with many of the farmers and ranchers who had helped them. Even the bartender from the saloon showed up, looking slightly uncomfortable in his Sunday best. Thea wore a simple white dress that she had sewn herself, with wildflowers woven into her hair. She looked radiant as she walked down the aisle, her eyes locked on Yates the entire time. He stood at the altar in his best clothes, which were not much but were clean and pressed, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. The minister, a kindly older man named Reverend Walsh, conducted the ceremony with warmth and sincerity. When it came time for the vows, Yates spoke from the heart. Thea, the day I found you crying at that well, I made you a promise. I said your tears end today. I meant it then, and I mean it now. I promise to spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to cry alone again. I promise to work beside you, to build our dreams together, to love you with everything I have. You have made me want to stop wandering and start living, and I am grateful every day that I followed the sound of your tears to that well. Thea's voice was thick with emotion as she responded. Yates, you came into my life when I had lost everything and saw no path forward. You gave me strength when I had none. You fought for me when I could not fight for myself. You showed me that even in the darkest times there is light to be found. I promise to love you, to build our future together, to stand by your side through whatever challenges we face. You are my hero, my partner, and my home. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, the church erupted in applause. Yates kissed his bride thoroughly, not caring who was watching, and Thea laughed against his lips, the sound pure joy. The reception was held at the homestead, with everyone bringing food and drink to share. Tables were set up outside, and music was played on fiddles and guitars. People danced and celebrated late into the night, toasting the newlyweds and the new era of fairness that had come to the valley. As the stars came out and the party began to wind down, Yates and Thea slipped away to stand by the new well, the place where their journey had truly begun. The moon was bright overhead, turning everything silver, and they could hear the distant sound of music and laughter. "Are you happy?" Yates asked, pulling her close. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Thea replied. "When I was sitting at that old well, crying because I thought my life was over, I never could have imagined this, that I would find love again, that I would have a partner to build a life with, that everything would turn out all right." "More than all right," Yates said. "We have a future now, Thea. A real future. We can build anything we want here. Together," she said, echoing the word that had become their promise to each other. Together, he agreed. The years that followed were not without their challenges, but Yates and Thea faced each one side by side. The homestead flourished with the reliable water from the new well. They expanded their crops, adding wheat and corn to the vegetables they grew. They bought more cattle and eventually some horses. Thea proved to have a natural talent for breeding chickens, and her eggs became sought after in town for their size and rich yellow yolks. Douglas Mercer was tried and found guilty of multiple crimes. He spent 5 years in territorial prison, and when he was released, he left Washington Territory and was never heard from again. Many of the properties he had seized were returned to their rightful owners or their heirs, and the valley began to prosper as small farmers and ranchers were finally able to work their land without fear. Peter Jenkins continued publishing the Kennewick Chronicle, using his paper to advocate for fairness and justice. He became known throughout the territory as a fearless journalist, and Yates and Thea remained his good friends throughout their lives. Sheriff Morrison cleaned up the corruption in the county and eventually became a territorial judge. He often cited the case of Thea Vaughn and Douglas Mercer as an example of why the law must protect the vulnerable from the powerful. But the greatest joy in Yates and Thea's life came from their family. 1 year after their marriage, Thea gave birth to a healthy baby boy they named Samuel, after her first husband. Yates had suggested the name, wanting to honor the man who had first brought Thea to this land and whose dreams they were now fulfilling. 2 years later, a daughter arrived, whom they named Rose for the wildflowers that had been in Thea's hair on their wedding day. 3 years after that, another son, whom they called James after Yates's father. The children grew up strong and happy on the homestead, learning the value of hard work and the importance of standing up for what is right. Young Samuel inherited his mother's head for business and his stepfather's sense of justice. Rose had her father's adventurous spirit and her mother's determination. James was quiet and thoughtful, with a talent for working with animals that amazed everyone. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Yates and Thea stood together at the well again, a tradition they had maintained every year. The homestead around them had transformed from the struggling claim it had been into a thriving farm. The cabin had been expanded into a proper house. The barn was large and well stocked. Fields of wheat waved golden in the September breeze. "You remember what this place looked like when you first arrived?" Thea asked, leaning back against Yates's chest as his arms wrapped around her. "I remember finding the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, crying like her heart was broken," Yates said. "I remember promising her that her tears would end that day." "You kept that promise," Thea said softly. "You have kept it every day since." "It was not hard," Yates replied. "Loving you has been the easiest thing I have ever done. Building this life with you, raising our children, growing old together, it is everything I never knew I wanted until I found you." Thea turned in his arms, reaching up to touch his face. There was silver in his hair now and lines around his eyes, but to her, he was still the cowboy who had appeared like an answer to prayer on the worst day of her life. "I was so lost when you found me. I thought I had no future, no hope, no reason to keep fighting. And then you appeared and changed everything." "We changed everything together," Yates corrected. "I may have given you a reason to fight, but you gave me a reason to stay. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. You made me into the man I always wanted to be." They kissed, a gentle press of lips that spoke of deep love and abiding commitment. Around them, the farm they had built together stood as testament to what could be accomplished when two people refused to give up, when they fought for what was right, when they chose love in the face of adversity. That evening, after dinner when the children were in bed, Yates and Thea sat together on their porch swing, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The air was cool and comfortable, carrying the scent of hay and earth and home. "What are you thinking about?" Thea asked, her head resting on Yates's shoulder. "I am thinking about that day I heard you crying," Yates said. "About how I had been drifting for so long, just wandering from place to place with no real destination. And then I heard you, and something inside me knew that my wandering days were over, that I had finally found what I had been searching for all along." "What was that?" Thea asked, though she thought she knew the answer. "A reason to stop moving," Yates said. "A reason to plant roots. You, Thea. You were what I had been searching for. I just did not know it until I found you." "I love you," Thea whispered. "I will love you until the day I die and beyond." "I love you too," Yates replied, "more than words can express." They sat in comfortable silence as night fell completely, the stars brilliant overhead. Inside the house, their children slept peacefully. Around them, the farm they had built together stood strong, and in that moment, everything was exactly as it should be. The years continued to pass, bringing more joy than sorrow. Their children grew into fine adults. Samuel took over the management of the farm, expanding it even further and becoming one of the most successful ranchers in the territory. Rose married a teacher from town and became a school teacher herself, advocating for education for all children. James became a veterinarian, the first in the region, and used his skills to help animals and their owners throughout the county. Yates and Thea became grandparents many times over, their house always filled with the laughter and chaos of visiting grandchildren. They shared their story often, wanting the younger generation to understand the importance of standing up against injustice, of fighting for what is right, of never giving up even when circumstances seem impossible. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the entire community of Kennewick threw them a celebration. The town had continued to grow and prosper, and many credited Yates and Thea with helping to create an atmosphere of fairness and justice that had allowed small farmers and ranchers to thrive. A plaque was placed at the well where they had first met, commemorating the place where their story began. At the celebration, Peter Jenkins, now gray-haired but still sharp-eyed and energetic, gave a toast. 25 years ago, a cowboy heard a woman crying and stopped to help. That simple act of kindness changed not just 2 lives, but an entire community. Yates and Thea Whitmore represent the best of what we can be: courageous, compassionate, and committed to justice. They showed us that one person can make a difference, and that love can conquer even the darkest circumstances. To Yates and Thea, may they have 25 more years of happiness together. Everyone raised their glasses and cheered. Yates and Thea stood together, her hand in his, both of them smiling through happy tears. They had built something remarkable, not just a successful farm, but a legacy of love and justice that would endure long after they were gone. More years passed, bringing the wisdom and perspective that only time can provide. Yates and Thea grew old together, their bodies slowing but their love never diminishing. They still walked to the well every year on their anniversary, though the walk took longer and required more rest stops. They still sat on their porch every evening, watching the sunset and talking about everything and nothing. They still looked at each other with the same love and wonder that had sparked on that day so long ago when a cowboy found a woman crying and promised to end her tears. When they celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary, it was a quieter affair, just family gathered at the homestead. Their children and grandchildren had prepared a feast, and the house rang with conversation and laughter. After dinner, Samuel stood to speak. "Mother and father," he said, his voice thick with emotion, We wanted to thank you for everything you have given us. Not just this farm, though it is a wonderful legacy. But more importantly, you gave us an example of what love should look like. You showed us that marriage is not just about the easy times, but about standing together through challenges. You taught us to fight for what is right, to never give up, to always choose love. We are all better people because of you. Rose wiped tears from her eyes as she added, "You gave us a home filled with love and laughter. You made us feel safe and cherished every single day. We watched you build this farm from almost nothing, watched you face down danger and emerge victorious, watched you love each other more deeply with each passing year. That is the greatest gift parents can give their children." James, always the quiet one, simply said, "Thank you for being the kind of parents we could look up to. Thank you for showing us what really matters in life." The grandchildren, ranging from teenagers to toddlers, all crowded around their grandparents, hugging and kissing them, expressing love in the ways children do. Yates and Thea held each other close, overwhelmed by the beauty of what they had created together. That night, after everyone had gone to bed and the house was finally quiet, Yates and Thea lay together in the bed they had shared for 40 years. Moonlight streamed through the window, casting silver light across the room. "You have any regrets?" Thea asked softly. Yates thought about it for a moment. "Not a single one. Every decision I made led me to you. Every mile I rode, every job I took, every hardship I endured, it all brought me to that well on that day when I heard you crying. And finding you, loving you, building this life with you, it has been the greatest adventure of my life." "Mine too," Thea agreed. "When I lost Samuel, I thought my life was over. I could not see any future beyond pain and loss. And then you appeared like an angel sent to rescue me. You gave me back my life, Yates. You gave me back my hope. You gave me love and family and joy. I cannot imagine what my life would have been without you." "You never have to imagine it," Yates said, pulling her closer. "We are together and we always will be." "Always," Thea echoed, the word a promise and a prayer. They continued their life together, savoring each day as the gift it was. Their bodies grew frailer with age, but their spirits remained strong. They still made the journey to the well on their anniversary, though eventually their children had to help them walk there. They still sat on the porch every evening, holding hands and watching the sun set over the land they had made bloom. On their 50th wedding anniversary, the celebration was enormous. The entire town turned out, along with people from all over the territory who had heard their story and been inspired by it. The well where they had met had become something of a landmark, and couples often came there to make wishes or propose marriage. At the celebration, the governor of Washington, which had achieved statehood years earlier, presented Yates and Thea with a commendation for their contributions to the development of the region and their example of courage and integrity. It was a grand affair, but what Yates and Thea treasured most was being surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. That evening, as the party wound down and the stars emerged overhead, Yates and Thea made their way slowly to the well. Their children had offered to go with them, but they wanted this moment alone, just the two of them as it had been 50 years ago. They stood by the well, holding each other, and Yates gently wiped a tear from Thea's cheek. "Happy tears this time, I hope," he said with a soft smile. "The happiest," Thea confirmed. "I am just overcome with gratitude. For you, for our family, for this beautiful life we have built together. 50 years ago, I was sitting here crying because I thought I had nothing left. Now I have everything." "We have everything," Yates corrected. "And it is all because you were brave enough to let me help you, brave enough to trust me, brave enough to love again even after you had been hurt. You are the strongest, most remarkable woman I have ever known, Thea Whitmore." "And you are the best man I have ever known," Thea replied. "You kept your promise, Yates. That very first day you promised that my tears would end, and they did. You gave me 50 years of happiness, of love, of joy. You gave me a life worth living." "You gave me the same," Yates said. "You made me into someone better than I was. You gave purpose to my wandering, meaning to my existence. You made me a husband, a father, a grandfather. You gave me a home. You gave me everything." They kissed then, a gentle press of lips that held 50 years of love, devotion, and partnership. Around them, the farm spread out in the moonlight, prosperous and peaceful. In the distance, they could hear the faint sounds of music and laughter from the celebration. And above them, the stars shone bright and eternal, bearing witness to a love that had endured and flourished. Yates and Thea lived for several more years, each day a blessing they never took for granted. They spent their final years surrounded by family, telling stories of the old days, imparting wisdom to the younger generations, and continuing to love each other with the same intensity that had marked their entire marriage. When Yates passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 89, the entire region mourned. He was remembered as a man of courage, integrity, and compassion, someone who had stood up against injustice and changed an entire community for the better. But most of all, he was remembered as a man who had loved his wife with unwavering devotion for more than 50 years. Thea lived for 2 more years after Yates's death, and though she grieved deeply, she also felt grateful for the time they had shared. She spent her final days surrounded by family, in the house they had built together, on the land they had fought for together. She talked often about Yates, keeping his memory alive through stories and laughter rather than just tears. On a warm September afternoon, exactly 53 years to the day after she and Yates had married, Thea passed away peacefully, sitting in the porch swing where she and Yates had spent so many evenings together. Her children found her there, a smile on her face, her eyes closed as if she were simply sleeping. In her hand was a faded photograph of her and Yates on their wedding day, both of them young and radiant with joy. They buried her beside Yates in the small cemetery on the hill overlooking their farm, under a large cottonwood tree. The headstone reads simply, "Thea and Yates Whitmore. Their love changed a valley and built a legacy that will endure forever." The farm continued to thrive under Samuel's care, and then under his children's care. The story of how Yates found Thea crying at the well and promised to end her tears became a legend in the region, passed down through generations. The well itself became a cherished landmark, maintained carefully by the family and visited by couples from all over who wanted to make wishes for love as enduring as what Yates and Thea had shared. Years turned into decades, and decades into a century, but the legacy of Yates and Thea Whitmore lived on. Their descendants spread throughout Washington and beyond, carrying with them the values their ancestors had demonstrated: courage in the face of adversity, compassion for those in need, and unwavering commitment to love and justice. The homestead itself was eventually donated to the state and turned into a historical site, preserved so that future generations could see where this remarkable story had unfolded. Visitors walked through the house where Yates and Thea had raised their family, saw the fields they had cultivated, and stood by the well where everything had begun. And everyone who visited came away with the same understanding: that love, real love, has the power to transform not just individuals but entire communities, not just the present but the future. The story of the cowboy who found a woman weeping at a well and promised to end her tears became more than just a local legend. It became a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in our darkest moments, love can find us. That even when we think we have lost everything, new beginnings are possible. That kindness matters, courage counts, and standing up for what is right can change the world. And somewhere, beyond the veil of time and space, Yates and Thea were together still, their love as eternal as the stars that had witnessed their first kiss by the well, their devotion as endless as the sky that had arched above their farm, their joy as boundless as the future they had built together. One promise kept, one challenge overcome, one day of love at a time.